Alright, so in our next video in AUC section 230, we're going to be taking a look at what exactly should we record when we're documenting our nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures. And this is in AUC sections 230.09 through 12. And we've got a lot of explanatory material sections here. So we'll go through these requirements, and then we can go down here and get some more color on the requirements. So first it says that when we're documenting the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures, we should record the identifying characteristics of the specific items or matters tested, who performed the audit work and the date such work was completed, and who reviewed the audit work performed and the date and extent of such review. So in this first one, we're supposed to identify the identifying characteristics. So for instance, maybe invoice numbers, contract numbers, maybe a check number, something like that. Some way for someone outside the engagement could go in and see which document or item did we look at. And also record who performed the work and who reviewed it. And now going on to some more specific items of what to record, we have that if we have some significant contracts or agreements, that we should put those in the audit documentation. Usually these are put into what we call a perm file, something that we maintain maybe for future years, such as maybe loan agreements or big contracts. And we need to put these contracts and agreements in the audit file somewhere. And also if we have some significant findings or issues and then we go talk to management about it, we should record or document what we discussed when we had the discussion and with whom we discussed these findings. Finally, if we're in our procedures, we have something that's inconsistent with our final conclusion regarding a significant finding or issue, we should document how we addressed the inconsistency. So if we have a significant finding and we come across something that's unusual or doesn't fit the facts, but then we go and discuss with management or we obtain some more information, we need to document what we did to get comfortable over that inconsistency. So now we've got kind of a high-level understanding of what we need to document as part of the audit. Let's go down to the explanatory material where we get some more specific advice on how to comply with these requirements. Okay, so now we're down in the explanatory material. And the first requirement that we saw in this video is that we need to identify specific items and the matters tested and who the preparer and who the reviewer are. So this item helps us to understand specifically how to comply with that particular requirement. First, it tells us the why, like how it tells us that recording the identifying characteristics serves a number of purposes for us. For example, it helps the reviewer to supervise and review the work performed. It also makes the engagement team accountable for its work and facilitates an investigation of exceptions or inconsistencies. So overall, if the engagement team is required to record the specific items that it looked at, they're more likely to act with integrity. And the engagement partner, or the one that he delegates to review the work, it's easier for them to identify the items that were used in the audit procedures and to overall supervise the engagement in that way. So the identifying characteristics of the documents that are reviewed in the or the documents that are used in the performance of the audit procedures, they can come with a different nature according to the procedure or the matter tested. So we have several examples here of different types of identifying characteristics. For instance, if we're looking at purchase orders in our test, then we might be able to identify those documents by the dates and the purchase order numbers. Next, if we were testing a population and we select all of them over a certain amount, we might document the amount of that we're scoping, and that would identify the items that we tested. Also, if we're doing a sampling technique, systematic sampling, we might identify how we selected those particular samples. For instance, with by saying what the source was, the starting point, and the sampling interval. So we might say something like from a list of the shipping log for the period April 1 to September 30th, we started at report number 12345 and selected every 125th report. So that would tell us which items were selected for testing, and a third party could come in and identify the specific ones that we selected. If we're performing some inquiries of entity personnel, we might record the inquiries that we made by saying the date and the name with whom and their job title and what we discussed with that person. So that would identify the procedures that we did and the identifying characteristics. And finally, if we're doing an observation procedure, we might record the process that we observed, the people that were involved and their responsibilities, and also where and when the observation took place. So this little section was helpful in that they included a lot of examples for each of the major nature of audit procedures. So detailed testing, a scope test, and then maybe a sampling test, as well as inquiries and observations. So this gives us a good idea of what all we need to document in each of those cases. So carrying on in our discussion of what to document in our audit documentation, we remember from AUC section 220 that we were supposed to review the audit work performed through a review of the audit documentation. And we remember that that we're supposed to document what audit work was reviewed, who reviewed it, and when it was reviewed. And this is typically done with a sign-off by the reviewer with his initials and the date. However, we see here that every work paper doesn't necessarily have to have some kind of evidence of review. But as we said, we do need to document what we did review, who reviewed it, and the date that it was reviewed. So next, we remember, as part of the requirements in this video, we're supposed to document our discussion of significant findings with management and those charged with governance. So for this part, they want to make it clear that the audit documentation doesn't necessarily only have to be documents that we prepared. It can also be documents prepared by the entity. For instance, they give an example of minutes of the board of director meetings, which might provide an appropriate summary of the meeting. And we may end up discussing significant findings with parties outside of management. For instance, maybe people providing professional advice to the entity. So this situation doesn't only include discussions of significant findings with management and those sorts of governments, but it also includes those discussions with others. So we need to make sure that we document any discussions that we have regarding significant findings or issues. And finally, we need to discuss how inconsistencies were addressed and in relation to the significant findings. So they want to emphasize here that this requirement doesn't imply that we need to retain documentation that is incorrect or superseded, but we do need to document procedures that were performed in response to the information and documentation of consultations or resolutions of differences in professional opinion among members of the engagement team or between the engagement team and others consulted.